get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
things.
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say a
As the
developer
Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Administrator Office Hours live stream. I am Andrew Sullivan, joined as always by my co-host, Mr. Johnny Rickard. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, man. How's it going?
Good. Did you have a good weekend? It was a long weekend for us here at Red Hat. We had a recharge day last Friday, so
Yeah, it was nice. I had to go take care of some family stuff back home, but yeah, it was pretty nice.
yeah. I had a nice relaxing weekend as well. Anybody who's eagle-eyed and has watched us a lot, you might notice that like this desk that's kind of behind me here is different. I rearranged the office a little bit. You wouldn't know except for a couple of minor differences, but I have a different desk in front of me. It's a standing desk or a sit-stand desk. So
Nice.
yeah, I'm getting used to it. Things are a little bit different than they were before and all that. So if I end up tripping over myself, we'll see how that goes. I'll try not
You
to
find
bang the
yourself-
microphone on. You see, I got the microphone arm here in my way again.
Oh
so.
yeah, nice. Do you find yourself standing up a lot more, or actually taking the time to stand up now, or?
I am I'm trying to do anytime I'm on the phone, I'm standing.
That's a good idea.
Which I think we talked about before. I'm a manager now, right? Which really what that means is I get to spend like 3 times as much time on the phone. So after spending the last 2.5 years, right, sitting behind a desk, not traveling, mostly sitting here on my rear end, it's not the healthiest thing. It turns out, who knew?
Yeah, right. COVID-50 is real, man. At least in my house.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think we mentioned before in that little intro video, there's like a little clip that scrolls across the top. That's me. And, it's from early in the streaming days. And I look a lot thinner then. So I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, that's why I grow the beard out, so that way you can't see like all the extras.
Yeah. So our Hope 9, yeah, thanks for the jab. I appreciate that. What it means being a manager is that it just means that I'm getting slowly less and less technical because we get to focus on more strategic type things, right? So my team is responsible for doing what we call solution patterns, which is basically a reference architecture by another name. And we're kind of like what Johnny's team does, but earlier in the process. So it's really an interesting set of challenges. So just for a little bit of background and a tangent for a moment. So Johnny's team is validated patterns, and effectively what they do is they take things that you all, our customers, have done, and they combine all those parts and pieces of the portfolio and put it into a CI system. And then basically constantly test and validate to make sure that all of those things are going to work together, that it does the things that we say it does, and all that other stuff. So you'll notice that I say there that it's validated. It means that somebody has done it, somebody has proven that it works. My team works kind of before that, so we work very closely with our product marketing folks. So one of the ones that we're working on now is application development with OpenShift. So for example, the product marketing team has this effort of, hey, we want to bring awareness of how to do new application development, application modernization with OpenShift. And, there is nothing that says, here is an example of how to do that. So we create the solution patterns that take, OpenShift with say, developer workspaces and pipelines and, all of these other things. And it's, here is an opinionated way that our SMEs say that you can, or have provided as an example of how to do that. And then hopefully somebody likes that and says, oh yeah, it does do that. And then Johnny's team takes it and, turns it into a validated pattern.
Yeah, that's a good explanation too. It's the art of the reality, right? Instead of it's like this nice fancy whiteboard, kind of like, oh, there's this great idea, but we don't really know if it works. It's really the reality behind it. Like, okay, we can actually do these things, and here's all the tooling, and it's to help trigger ideas too. Like, okay, well, maybe my solution isn't 100% that, but it's like 80% of that. But so maybe I can take this little piece of my app and bolt it on and get the same thing. It's pretty awesome that we're doing this.
Yeah. And I like that your team with the CI stuff, like you're combining things in ways that engineering, the individual product or feature engineering doesn't always do it. So you'll find issues very early on and stuff like that. So it's really cool.
Yep.
All right. Let's see. What was I going to talk about here? So I should probably continue with my normal spiel here. So the Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hour is, as the name implies, part of the Office Hours series of live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming. So what that means is we are here to answer your questions. Whatever it is that's on your mind about OpenShift, about things kind of surrounding or adjacent to OpenShift, we'll do our best to answer those questions. If we don't know the answer, we try and get the answers from folks that we can reach back and ping while we're on the stream here. But of course, if we can't do that, then we'll follow up next week and see if we can get those questions answered. So Johnny and I are we like to think we know a lot about OpenShift, but OpenShift it's like a fractal, right? Every time you answer a question, it spawns like a whole new set of questions, and it's just never ending. It keeps going. So don't hesitate to ask questions here in chat. Doesn't matter which platform you're watching us on, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitch, all of that other stuff. We use a platform called Restream. It pushes all of the things to all of the things. So chat on whatever platform you're on. We'll do our best to respond to that. And of course, you can always reach out to us via, if you're not watching live, you can reach out to us via social media. So I am at Practical Andrew on Twitter and Reddit and all the various places. Or you can send me an email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. And I'll toss Johnny under the bus too at jrocktx1 on social media, or Johnny, JONNY @redhat.com. Go ahead, feel free to start sending us over questions. We'll do our best to answer those around OpenShift. But I also want to point out that today's topic is Nutanix. So I am very happy to be joined by somebody that I've been working with for a while. We've at least a year now. We've been chatting back and forth, and we've done a bunch of stuff, outside of live streams, which is Andy Daniel from Nutanix. So, Andy, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, hi. As you said, Andy Daniel, Nutanix. So I'm a group product manager now. It's funny you mentioned that, Andrew, sort of managing people and a team and that kind of thing. That's certainly new to me as well. So, our careers are evolving in parallel a bit here, right? But no, I head up essentially everything cloud native at Nutanix, right? Which is a lot,
Yeah,
if you will.
It's only a small definition there, right?
No, yeah, tiny. No, of course, obviously OpenShift being a huge part of that for us, right, as a preferred partner. I think a little over a year ago, the company's made that announcement. So,
yeah, and we'll talk about that more in just a couple of minutes. So today's topic is, of course, around OpenShift 4.11 and kind of the new set of integrations, the new set of things that we've announced with Nutanix underlying that. So again, we'll touch on this more in just a minute, but you remember about a year ago was when we first announced the Red Hat Nutanix partnership and alliance had expanded, and all of the things were supported on all of the things and all of that. So with 4.11, it's now fully integrated. There's lots of really cool stuff that we can show in there. So Andy, I know we were chatting beforehand, and you said that your demo environment pulled a Johnny, and it's not cooperating. So we'll see what we can see, and we'll go from there. But what's the worst that happens, right? You come back, and we try again.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a release every 4 months, right? We'll have plenty of opportunity
for sure.
All right, so let's go ahead and address some of our top of mind topics, Johnny. There's a couple of things that I think we should probably bring up. So the first one I'll lead off with is, so last week I mentioned that 4.11 implements the restricted v2 pod security policy, or SCC, inside of the cluster. So effectively, the big change there is restricted didn't drop everything. It dropped, I think there was 4 or 6 different permissions inside of there, as well as didn't allow privilege escalation and stuff like that. So restricted v2 drops all permissions by default. So from a security perspective, this is definitely something that I think a lot of security teams will like. But it does have the potential to cause some issues. So one of the things that I want to point out is that, and I think last week we talked about, hey, use this time while upgrades are not in stable, from 4.10 to 4.11, they're in fast, but they're not in stable yet. Use this time to deploy a 4.11 cluster and test. I want to point out, though, that I was corrected after our stream. Upgraded clusters do not switch to restricted v2 by default. Upgraded clusters will stay with restricted as the default. It's only newly deployed clusters that will switch or that will use restricted v2 by default. So if you deploy a new cluster to test on and everything works great, then you're automatically set, right? And you can make that switch. You can change the default over to restricted v2 once you do the upgrade. But yeah, just be aware that I think the goal there is definitely we don't want to break folks. So giving them that time. The other thing that I'll bring up here, Johnny, I know you added a bunch of stuff inside of here. I posted on Reddit that, and I think on Twitter, that 4.11 was available now. And somebody asked, oh, I'm using, the fast channel, but it's not showing up as an available upgrade. So there's actually a blocker, or a conditional upgrade, I should say. So let me paste this in here, and I will paste it. So I will paste it into chat on Twitch, and then I will share my screen. Doing lots of clicking here. All right, so effectively they discovered an issue at certain scale. We can see here nodes with substantial number of containers, for example, 200 plus, and contention for CPU time are likely to have the RPM OSD tree service fail to start. So if you choose, right, if you believe that you are firmly underneath these numbers, you're not going to encounter this issue, you can absolutely do the conditional update process. And you can manually, I won't say force, but you can manually choose to accept the risk associated with that and have your cluster update from 4.10 to 4.11 as a part of the fast brand or release tree. So if I go to docs.openshift.com/4.10, then we'll switch to 4.11. So if I go to updating clusters, and then I go to this updating a cluster using the CLI and scroll down here, there is a set of instructions. If I scroll down far enough, I guess I could click the short link here for how to use a conditional upgrade path. So on the CLI, if you do this OC ADM upgrade include not recommended, it should tell you specifically about that bug or that issue. And then you can basically tell it, thank you, I know, please allow me to do this not recommended upgrade, and you can get that done from there. And for what it's worth, do I still have the link open? I don't think I do. Let me find the link to the upgrade path thing. Come on, internet. You can do it.
Come on, little buddy.
Here we go. So if we look at the upgrade path tool here, and if I select fast 4.11, so if I select 4.11 here, you can see that the from, everything's in red. So if I just hover, or if I click on one of those rather, right, it tells you exactly about this issue that's there. So, and I don't think it's linked from the errata. So I thought it linked from these, but I guess not. Anyways, it'll tell you that there's a risk there. You can use that conditional update to go from any one of those releases up to 4.11 in the fast channel, of course. All right, that's all I had. Johnny, I know you dropped a couple items in here.
Yeah. The big one is just that Kubernetes 125. The upstream Kubernetes is releasing next Monday, unless something slips. But they're usually pretty good about staying on schedule. The reason why we're bringing that up, and going back to Andrew's point about the restricted v2 SEC, is that the pod security policies are going. There's some that are going to drop, and there's a big change in 1.25. So that'll most likely be OpenShift 4.12. The Red Hat community practice is putting some stuff together. So that way we can keep, all of us informed and all of you informed. So that way you can, what to do, or you'll know what to expect when these things are happening. The other one is OpenShift pipelines released. There's a blog. Let me copy the link here. But some of the big things for me, anyways, the selfish things, were that pipelines will run on ARM now, and there's a tech preview feature called Pipelines as Code that's getting some more love in 1.8. There's just some cool things that it can do with Git now. And Pipelines as Code, I just found out about the other day, and so I was reading up on it, and it's pretty awesome. So once you start reading up on Tecton, the pipeline runs will kick off your pipeline. Pipeline as code, you can put this pipeline run kind of like embedded in your project, and then it'll just kick it off automatically. It's really, really awesome how it works, and it's just kind of cool to see all these tools coming together where you can actually automate all the things now, and not that you couldn't do it all before, but it's just easier to automate all the things now, especially within OpenShift and Git. So your GitOps workflow is going to be a lot smoother.
The
I think that's it for
pipelines
me.
as code is really cool because it's basically pointed at your Git repository, and it sets up everything for you, inside of the pipeline, set up the build, set up all the other stuff that you need in order to take that, code repository all the way out to production.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I'm excited. Like, I'm going to go kick the tires of that hopefully this week and early next week. So it's pretty cool to see. And that's it for me, Andrew.
All right. So let's see. Let's look back. I know there's a couple of questions. Alfadil, how to implement full DRC switchover, rewarding volumes in Kubernetes objects. I don't know that I understand the question. I don't know what a DRC switchover is. Does that ring a bell, Johnny?
No, I was thinking disaster recovery, but I'm not 100% sure if that's what he means.
Okay. Yeah. If you could provide some more details in chat here, we'll answer your question as best as we can. Or feel free to reach out via email. Again, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com.
There's one from John about he wants to do a single node OpenShift setup, but doesn't want to punch a hole in his home network. Is that required to talk to Red Hat?
No, but yes. So when you deploy a cluster by default, right, it'll want to reach out and it'll want to pull a bunch of container images from Quay and from I think it's catalog or container or registry.redhat.com. I don't think it goes from Quay anymore, but I might be wrong on that. So it does reach out, but you don't have to expose anything to the outside world. But you can mirror that. So you can basically do a disconnected install and mirror all of those images to an internal registry, and then it doesn't have to reach out at all. So if you already have a workstation, for example, that has whatever, firewall exceptions in place, you can pull the images there and then push them into a registry internally. Let's see. Haven't used Fargate. Yep. I'm just catching up on chat because I was running my mouth before.
Yeah. So Andy asked a question: Will Red Hat OCP licensing cost more to run on Nutanix?
No, it costs the same. It's funny. Sometimes people ask me, "Oh, how much does OpenShift cost?" I honestly have no idea.
Same.
I register it with my pull secret and it just works. Although I think I almost always use eval licenses because we rarely have things that last longer than that. But your account team is really the only ones who can answer what the cost is going to be. But that being said, there's only two entitlements for OpenShift. There's socket-based and there's core-based. If you're installing OpenShift directly to physical servers, it's socket-based. If you're installing OpenShift to anything that isn't a physical server, it's core-based. It doesn't matter if it's Nutanix, if it's AWS, if it's Azure, all exactly the same. So yeah, John, if you're deploying OpenShift proper, you do need a pull secret. So you can register for a developer account, and that's just developers.redhat.com. That does entitle you to up to 16 nodes or 16 cores, I think, for single user non-production use of OpenShift. You can also use the upstream OKD. OKD doesn't require an entitlement or anything like that. It'll still ask for a pull secret, but if you look at the any of the instructions, any of the documentation, it tells you to just fill in like a dummy string, basically enough JSON to get it to pass the check and not harass you.
Yep.
Yeah. TechDom Hub was GA in 4.11 too, wasn't it? I think so. I don't know. I think
so. Yeah.
I haven't looked. There's a number of things that are decoupled from OpenShift. So the core, when we say OpenShift 4.11 is released, essentially the core of OpenShift is GA 4.11, right? All of that other stuff. But other things, so think OpenShift virtualization and service mesh and GitOps and all of those other things, they all have release cycles that are decoupled from OpenShift. So some of them, I think they all try and be relatively close to OpenShift's release, but some of them aren't. For example, I think OpenShift logging 5.5 or whatever the new version is, I think it was supposed to release this week. So it's like a week later, but OpenShift virtualization is not until the end of the month or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think Data Foundations is the same, like towards the end of the month.
Yeah. So it's, they all try and be close, but they aren't all exactly on the same day for those. So. All right. So please keep questions coming in. We'll do, we will address those as quickly as we can. Usually, and I know folks sometimes, think we don't see your questions. We try and at least acknowledge them in chat, even if we don't acknowledge them here while we're chatting, because we're wanting to finish out a thought or finish out something like that. So don't worry too much. I hope folks, long time watchers like our Hope 9 will vouch for us. If we do usually circle back around, and I always try and add in a catch at the end of, if we didn't get to your question, remind us now, type of thing. But so yeah, don't be afraid to send in your questions. We'll do our best to get to them. And of course, you can always reach out on the various other platforms if you're not watching us live, or if we really truly do either miss your question or don't adequately answer it. All right, Andy, let's talk about Nutanix.
Yeah.
So I most folks know I was a customer a while ago. I've worked for storage vendor. I work for Red Hat now, all of that other stuff. I've been aware of Nutanix and what they do for at least a decade. So I know that a lot has changed at this point. It's been 9 years that I've been a vendor. So I know a lot has changed since the last time as a customer, I really dug into Nutanix and what y'all do and how it works and all that other stuff. So if you don't mind, for my own education, can you tell us about Nutanix? And I know there's AHV and there's AOS and there's all of these other things. So I think kind of level setting, what the technology is and why it's important, all of that is really important. So, and please, if you had anything that you want to start off with instead of me like diving right into the deep end, by all means.
No. I look, I think that's perfect. I mean, I think admittedly, my history is probably the same, before I joined Nutanix. I mean, I think what I can probably say without a doubt is that Nutanix really invented the hyperconverged segment, right? Back when we, virtual machines were, the name of the game, right? Before we started, the invent of sort of cloud native and containers and that good stuff.
Sorry to interrupt you. Was it Nutanix? Who was it? I remember it like VMworlds back in the early 2010s. They had like the no SAN messaging.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll remember, some folks will probably remember that, if nothing else, right, about Nutanix. Yeah, absolutely. The no SAN with the X over it and that kind of thing. And that was really it. Look, I mean, I think now for most folks, particularly that are in the virtualization space, hyperconverged is for a lot of people, even kind of the standard now. Right. And so I think I kind of take a step back and look at how we started a lot of times and kind of compare it to where we're at in cloud native and what we're doing. And what I think is really cool is, one of the other sort of marketing messages we had back in the day was that really where we were born was sort of web scale. Right. And so, I think a big part of the way the system was designed in the early days was to, if you want, start small with a single node, right, or a few nodes, and then continue to sort of build out, right, in sort of an infinite scale matter. Now, back in the day, we really made our name really in the VDI space, right? So, particularly folks that are very familiar with VDI and in that space specifically, almost always will know Nutanix because of that. But that really kind of comes back to the architecture and why it was built in that way, right? And sort of scalability. What more do you need that sort of elasticity back in the day than VDI more than really anything else, right? With people kind of coming on and offline. But, since then, right, that's certainly a long time ago. And what we've really concentrated since is really kind of, becoming now what is sort of the de facto standard in that space for data services. And so, the fact that it is HCI on the back end is, sure. I mean, that's exactly what it is, but it really is sort of the platform, and what, me and my team and the folks really on the cloud native side are really focusing on is that we really become kind of the de facto platform standard outside of the hyperscale cloud for containerization and cloud native, right? And it's really kind of almost, transparent's not the word, but, almost making that core infrastructure go away in the same way that it does if you want to, deploy into, AWS or Azure or whom else, on the hyperscale side, right? It's the same sort of setup. You sort of mentioned, hypervisors, right? With AHV actually being our hypervisor. And that was one of the things that we did. I think it's been maybe 5 or more years ago that we said, you know what, let's actually continue to bake in for customers and make things even more turnkey, right? Because when we did get started, it was on top of ESX, right? And vSphere. And in fact, a large portion of our customer base, I think roughly half or so still runs ESX is the hypervisor, but our concentration really has been on AHV and our own, again, just because it's simplicity, right? It makes the entire infrastructure turnkey. So, I'm happy to dive into any specific element or anywhere from there. It's certainly a big topic, Nutanix in general, but I think for OpenShift in particular, what's really key and what really makes me excited is that when we do look at the data services piece, we bring it all, right? And so, whether it's, block with what we call volumes, right? Or file storage or even object store, right? All available to any Nutanix customer right on the standard platform, right? Mm-hmm. And fully integrated as we continue to move forward inside of OpenShift with sort of full operator support and those kind of things.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were saying before, the group product manager for cloud native ecosystem. And one of the things that I noticed, and this is before I worked at Red Hat, I worked for a storage vendor, and I did, my role was like the virtualization, storage integration, tech marketing person, and all that other stuff. And I started having more and more conversations with virtualization teams. I'm like, hey, have you noticed how your app teams have stopped asking you for so many VMs? And, they ask you for, one set of 10 or 20 VMs, and they deploy Kubernetes or whatever on top of that. And then they kind of get quiet. Right. So to me, it's, seeing what Nutanix is doing and moving forward and starting to look at, how do we directly integrate, the platform and Kubernetes and all that other stuff is just furthering that testament. And of course, that's one of the main reasons I came to Red Hat to work with OpenShift is, virtual machines they're not going anywhere, right? They're still critically important. There's still so much business logic and data and applications and everything that are in VMs. But it seems like it's slowing down an awful lot, right? So, containers and Kubernetes it's exciting to me, as you may or may not be able to tell by the fact that we've had we're 79 shows into a live stream about it.
Right.
So yeah, that's again, it's really cool, and it's exciting to me to see others, and I say that tongue in cheek, right? It's not just Nutanix. VMware certainly recognizes that. Red Hat recognizes it. There's a lot of other companies, but I'm loving seeing it, and I think Nutanix to me is a particularly interesting one because for whatever reason, and Andrew doesn't know, it took us a long time to figure out how to work together. As we said at the start, it's only been like a year. For a long time, it was, Nutanix was not a certified hypervisor for RHEL and therefore not for OpenShift either. So yeah, it's really cool that we did finally get that done. And it's all magic and rainbows and ponies and unicorns from here, right?
For sure. It's interesting having sort of purview into the last year or more of getting here. I don't know if any folks sort of watching kind of follow, the actual, open source side as the new releases are built and that kind of thing. But I think what was really exciting for me is this was really an opportunity for us to really start contributing in a real way, not just with Red Hat and OpenShift, but in open source community in general, right? And although, certainly our engineering teams have worked together as part of the 4.11 release, most of the heavy lifting was from Nutanix engineering, right? And that was really exciting for me, and I think for the company in general. And in fact, I'll say, I hopefully won't get upset with me about this, but sort of product manager on the OpenShift side, actually said, look, this is really the first time we frankly have brought a new platform to bear in a single release. Right. And that was, he felt was really a testament to the relationship that we had working together, not just, our engineering team, but frankly, the Red Hat engineers that really pitched in and it really was a cohesive team that was able to deliver this. And, as we move into 4.12 and continue down the road, like lots of other cool stuff, we'll bring to bear, additional sort of operators for other services that we have, like database service and some other cool stuff. So, like you said, rainbows and, we're off to the races now. I'm excited.
Yeah. This whole, I'll say getting to the point where we are today, I think was the hardest part, which is figuring out the installer and how all of this stuff goes together. And, we've talked in previous streams, we've talked about all of the stuff that happens underneath the covers during the install process. And, there's machine API integration that has to be done, and that has to be incorporated into, the machine API operator. And then there's installer work that has to be done, which is, underneath the covers, it's Terraform. And like, there's just all of these things that have to happen. And it's not just coding it once and letting it be. It's this constant testing and this constant validation. And to me, this was the first one that I've been involved in where, like you said, it's been led by our partner, and working very closely with our engineering folks. But the lion's share of that work has been done by y'all. So it's really cool to me. And this is the culmination of a year. I've been in Slack and watched, and watch the fights happening. I say fights. Watch the challenges that those teams have faced and watch them overcome all of it. And now we get to see the fruition of all that work, and it's great.
Yeah, congratulations. That's awesome.
So I want to poke at AHV for just a moment. I worked with Rev before. I've worked with vSphere before. So AHV, which is Acropolis Hypervisor, if I'm remembering acronyms correctly.
I'll get in trouble here from the folks, the suits, if you will. But yes, it was originally known as that. At some point, we said it is just AHV, right?
Okay.
Like that. But yes, I think that's how it started. Kind of way back in its infancy. Yeah.
What's there's other acronyms out there where it's like I'm trying to think of the one where it's like something is something and it's like the same acronym over again or something like that. Anyways.
Yeah.
So AHV is a KVM based hypervisor underneath the covers.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay. So it's a Linux based platform. We're running KVM inside of there. And then when we layer on, and this is where it starts to get fuzzy for me, we layer on storage services, so the Nutanix storage capabilities. So it creates a hyperconverged, right, distributed data store on top of that. And that's where virtual machine storage, that's where, PVCs, all that other stuff goes inside of there. So if you'll indulge my inner storage nerd for a moment, can you talk a little bit about the Nutanix storage, how that works? Because it's interesting to me.
Yeah. And look, this is definitely something that at the time when we first started was a little bit different in the space, right? Like what we actually did is we implement, everything, even in the storage layer and any other data services actually in the user space, right? So for us, everything that actually runs on Nutanix and on the platform, again, whether it's volumes for block storage or files or even object storage, or frankly, even our Prism management interface, right? All actually just manifests as a set of virtual machines, right? Now, what we do is we fully automate that, of course. And in fact, the core of the actual storage services themselves are actually serviced by what we call a controller virtual machine, a CVM. And we even have a checkbox kind of within the Prism interface where if you want to see those virtual machines, you certainly can, right? But, that is the core system. And so by default, they're typically hidden in that case, right? And in the same kind of thing, right? If I do want file volume storage, I simply within the Prism interface go enable that. We spin up a set of virtual machines to do that all for you, right? In that case. And now, of course, certainly performance concerns and that kind of thing as you make the hop into there, right? So, of course, when it comes to disk attachment and all those kind of things, those happen sort of as pass through, right? And that kind of thing. But yeah, they are sort of all the system itself. The actual, hypervisor layer is really small. It's so there's not a, obviously for security and performance and other reasons there, right? We sort of limit that. So everything is kind of in that user space. So
yeah, it reminds me a little bit for Red Hat folks. It reminds me a little bit of like Red Hat virtualization, the Rev node or Rev host model of it's basically a small as possible appliance type model for that hypervisor operating system.
Yep.
So that way you can reduce footprint and management overhead and all that other stuff. Christian making a terrible joke there. Hello, Christian, and good morning to you. So AHV hypervisor we have, and forgive me, storage it's not AOS.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is the platform, right? And then each of the different types of storage, we just generally refer to them as, kind of the type that it is, whether it's volume, object, file, right? We try to kind of stay simple in that and not sort of, overly complicate the naming with, whiz bang.
And then you said Prism. So Prism is the overarching management software that you interact with kind of on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yep.
So
yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I was going to move on. So please.
Oh, I was just going to ask about the storage. Do you get that? Is that all out of the box? So like this, if you have
Absolutely.
this Nutanix device, you have access to like image, object, and block. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, you do. And admittedly, there are some limits on that depending on the license type, right? But yeah, and that's one of the things, like as an example in OpenShift, right? So as we move to what we did for sort of speed of implementation, say, for example, image registry, right? So by default, we would have you configure that just on block because that's most simple sort of de facto license. You get everything. Obviously, probably the right place to put that is in objects. And so as we move forward, we're considering whether we want to make that sort of the IPI default or not. And because you do get several terabytes of object storage. What you don't necessarily get is the customer may not necessarily choose to enable objects out of the box, right? So that's sort of the decision making we have to make. It's like, okay, well, if we, now use objects by default, now that kind of becomes a prerequisite. We say, whether it's free or not, you may not want to, actually deploy it. So.
Gotcha. Is there integration? And I don't know if this is a roadmap thing or whatever. Is there integration with the Nutanix storage and like a ODF, the OpenShift Data Foundation, or is it just kind of ODF sits on top, it absorbs the disk and stuff like that, and then reuses?
It certainly could. This is interesting, right? Like we've kind of on the product side and with customers, we've kind of gone back and forth quite a bit on this, frankly, because we do see requests for it. It's one of those things where the engineer in me says, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, do I want to, I'm already sort of have a virtual layer. I'm pulling it out, right? Like, I would love to give it formal disk in some way, right? So I'm kind of adding additional layers when I do that. What we want to do is certainly expose our CSI, right? Which has been available for some time, even before IPI was available. It's an OLM based operator to deploy that. And kind of gives you full functionality for volumes and files. But the ODF, it's interesting. We'll see. I don't want to make any pre-announcements here, right? But let's see what that integration continues to look like. The other thing I'll mention to you, right, in that way is that one thing I'm really excited about is that we're actually nearing completion. And it may be a little early. I don't know how many people watch, and hopefully I won't get in trouble. But we are actually targeting what we're calling cloud native data services as well, which is an ODF-like sort of layer as well, provides additional functionality, that kind of thing. So yeah, more highly integrated within not just OpenShift, but certainly any Kubernetes distribution as well. Will bring some sort of similar functionality. So
Awesome.
Yeah, I think one of the most frequent questions that comes up in that area is around, data protection, disaster recovery. ODF with Ramen and ACM, allows you to set up, in a cloud native way, set up replication and all of that other stuff.
Yep.
And I know, Nutanix, of course, you can set up data replication, volume replication and all that. I think the CSI driver allows you to import volumes. So, all of that would be available as well. Just today, maybe not in that, cloud native way that Ramen offers.
Exactly. And that's what we're really looking to do with what we're calling sort of CNDS for now in that way, right? And, extend sort of CRD entirely inside of OpenShift and other distributions, right? If you want to kind of control entirely from there, because certainly, right? Like, and I think that's the thing, right? Like our heritage, if you will, right, is sort of HCI storage and all those things that, we've been doing replication back, all these things sort of natively for a very long time. So I think we have a lot to offer that we can sort of bring into sort of these data services and taking a look at that. Certainly we'll continue to support, whatever, sort of third-party products want to layer on top of ours, but from an engineering perspective, we do try to say, well, if we have that at our layer, let's expose that in natively, right, to allow sort of the Kubernetes admin to, or sort of DevOps team to be able to access that versus necessarily maybe add another layer on top. So we'll see. There's always sort of integration that can happen. Even if it's sort of control from a ODF layer, something like that, potentially that could then sort of utilize third-party CSI or do some other things, right? So we'll see how that evolves.
But that includes hyperscalers too, right? AOS runs in AWS and all of that. So
yeah, it does. So what we do when we actually run inside of AWS and very soon Azure, which I think we're kind of in public preview for now, we do actually run bare metal there. And so you get the entire sort of native Nutanix experience, which is really great, right? Sort of allowing you to integrate, sort of whether it is just basic replication as an example or whatever that may be, right? Exact same interface, that kind of thing. So, which, admittedly, that's been a lot of work too, right?
I can imagine. So I'm going to pause for a second because so we've had a couple of folks ask. I see Barbarossa just now, and there was another person. Where did it go, Johnny? Gokar. So they've both kind of asked about, how do you become an OpenShift admin? How do you, get more knowledgeable on that? So whenever this comes up, there's always kind of 3 core resources that we recommend folks check out. So the first one is quite simply learn.openshift.com. So that'll take you over to a portal, and let me share my screen here. We want this guy. So if we go to learn.openshift.com, it actually redirects you over to developers now. But one, you can see that there's a number of different resources in here. Being a developer's landing page, most of these are going to be focused on like applications and stuff on top of it. But if you scroll down here to the learning or the interactive lessons, there's a whole bunch of stuff inside of here that you can, focus on, and it has just all kinds of different things, right? So logging into an OpenShift cluster, right? The OpenShift 4.10 playground. There's a number of these all inside of here, and I'm looking through the list. These aren't all the only OpenShift ones, but it's a great way to get hands-on with an OpenShift cluster literally right away. You see, I haven't logged in anything. I haven't done anything except click the launch button here, and apparently it's got a provision one. The pool is empty. But without doing anything, in 19 minutes or less, I'll be dropped into a running OpenShift environment. So you can, click around and get familiar with it. I use this interface all the time, or I used to when we would go to conferences. So, when I'm working in a booth and I need to demo something to somebody, I just pull up one of these and, use that to demo stuff. Speaking of which, I will be at VMware Explorer. So if anybody's going to be at VMware Explorer at the end of the month, stop by the Red Hat booth, because that's where I'll be living most of the time. So learn.openshift.com, first place I always send folks. Great way to get started. The next one would be try.openshift.com. So try.openshift.com will link you to various things. So you can see Developer Sandbox. This is, of course, more targeted at developers. Gives you access to an OpenShift cluster for 30 days at a time. You can kind of come back. It just resets after 30 days. And it's really meant for folks who are wanting to, develop an operator or test how some things work, where you can see it gives you access to the Che-based IDE and all that other stuff. But from here, it has links into the managed services if you want to try out Rosa or ARO. Self-managed, you can see anybody with a Red Hat account, even outside of the developer account, you have access to a 60-day trial for OpenShift. So that would be the second one that I recommend. And then the third one is the DO080 course.
I'll post the link to that one.
Thank you. So the DO080 is a free training course from Red Hat Learning. That is kind of the introduction, right? It scratches the surface across OpenShift. So I know it says OpenShift 4.1 here. It's not 4.1 based, but it's a zero cost, right? 30-day course that you can go through and learn just kind of the basics from there. Beyond that, participate in the community. I always recommend folks go over to Slack. So the Kubernetes Slack. So kubernetes.slack.com. There's a OpenShift users space in there. So you can come in there. There's a couple of thousand of your closest friends to help answer questions and stuff like that. Point you at various resources. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff. Reddit. There's an OpenShift subreddit that you can participate in there, along with the Red Hat subreddit. There's tons of folks that ask questions in there all the time. So don't hesitate to reach out and just learn. I'm a hands-on learner, so for me, it's how do I get started? How do I get hands-on? If you look on the OpenShift YouTube channel, so the OpenShift YouTube channel has a ton of resources for going through and just learning how to do things like deploy OpenShift. If you want a video-based guide, I think most of those are older now, with the exception of the Nutanix one. Most of those are going to be older now. Yeah. So again, don't hesitate to reach out. You can always reach out to Johnny and I on social media or all the other places, email, etc., and we'll do our best to help out if we can.
Yeah, and Stephanie posted a link to the Level Up Hour podcast, or not podcast, but live stream this morning, where Randy and the folks went over each of the certifications. So just to get an idea of like what we have as a certification and training, check that live stream out.
Yeah. Let's see. Looking through chat here. Christian, bare metal. Yep. Thank you. Looking at the OpenShift upgrade DAG. Yep. Let's see. How to track an SEC assigned to a service account. So it will automatically select the SEC that has the least privileges that is accessible to the service account. So you can see based off of RBAC which SECs are available, and I don't remember the command off the top of my head. Johnny, I don't know if you have a link. Let's see. Let's go to docs and 4.11 and SCC and this guy. Yeah. So you can see here role-based access. So OC create role, blah, blah, blah. So essentially you can limit it to a specific SEC. So let's say that you only want to have a pod use one SEC. Basically, you create or you assign to the service account that it's using only RBAC for that particular service or for that particular SEC. If you just use the default, then it has a couple that it'll select from, and it'll automatically choose the right one. If you want to see the SEC that's in use by a pod, it's in the details for a pod. Do I have something up? I do have something up. So you get pod-A. I'm just going to choose one of these at random. So we'll choose this. Let's see, get pod here, -n, OpenShift SDN. Oops. If we look at this guy and scroll up here, so we can see here the security context privilege true. So that'll tell you if there's additional permissions that have been granted to it. This is an SDN pod, so privileged makes sense here. But if I keep scrolling up, all the way up here. I've of course picked one that's ridiculously long. There should be an annotation that has, this one might be because it's a privileged pod, it might not have it. But normally there's an annotation that tells you what the SEC is.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can find a better example to use here. Probably not, because they're all core stuff.
I also posted there's a blog that was put together. I can't remember when. I guess I could go look at the date. Back in 2020, about SEC management and OpenShift. It's pretty good. Like the person that wrote it up, they went through a few good scenarios and gave a lot of context around how, why, and when. So check that blog out that we posted.
I'm just trying to see if I can find one that I can show here. Again, went too far that time. Annotations. Yeah, here. OpenShift.io/SEC node-exporter. So that's how you can see what the specific SEC assigned to a pod is. We talked a little bit about that last week with the restricted v2 change. All right. So sorry for the distraction there, or the changing directions on you, Andy.
No.
So I'm going to stop sharing here. So for anybody in our audience, please don't hesitate to keep suggesting, or sending words. Words are hard all of a sudden. Please don't hesitate to keep sending in questions. We'll do our best to address those. And thank you for everybody who has asked questions. We really do appreciate that. As Johnny and I always say, like, this answering questions is why we're here. Like, this is what makes it fun and challenging, and watching me trip over myself trying to talk and type at the same time and all that other stuff.
Oh yes, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about, kind of Nutanix and a lot of the technology and a lot of the stuff under there. So can we? So one, I want to point out that a year ago, when we first announced that OpenShift on Nutanix was supported, we created a demo video. Where did it go? Here we go. So I'm going to post this onto Twitch, a demo video that showed how to deploy that. And at the time, it was a non-integrated install because we didn't have IPI, we didn't have UPI, right? There was no machine API, cloud provider integration, none of that stuff. So it was fully supported because it was tested, it was validated, right? Engineering did all the stuff that they need to, even though it was a non-integrated install. But CSI and all that stuff still worked. Nutanix, like several other platforms, doesn't require a cloud provider to be present for CSI integration. So that video is great. I say that knowing that I created that video, so it's wonderful. So it's the best install video you've seen today,
hands down.
Yeah. So anyways, if you want to see what that process looks like, you can absolutely go there and check it out. But today we have IPI. So would it be possible to look at like the how do we kick off an IPI install process? And I know it takes 20 or 30 minutes, so I don't think we want to. And if you've seen one IPI install, you've seen all of them. So I don't think we actually need to go through and see it. But
I mean, I can show you, how I select Nutanix as the provider.
So I
certainly.
Yep, and I know. I think if we just do like an OpenShift install create ignition config, that should ask us all the questions, right? I'm thinking back; it's been a minute since I used OpenShift install other than create cluster.
Yeah, so this is console to say, I'll just quickly show you, right? So it's sort of here. You can see, from a platform perspective. Yeah, I was just kind of looking at the screen, make sure that was big enough for everybody, right?
Yeah, it looks good.
Now, we talked about sort of Prism earlier, right? Sort of being the management. So we sort of have two different things to think about here, and certainly each cluster, if you will, right? Each CI cluster that we deploy has a management console that runs there, and we call that sort of Prism or Prism element, right? So customers that are familiar with Nutanix already, we call it sort of PE is what we refer to that. And then there's a Prism Central that then aggregates all those together, right? Becomes a management point for multiple clusters, that kind of thing. And that's actually what we're going to leverage now. In general, as a company, we're migrating almost all of our API endpoints and everything else to be entirely managed at a Prism Central layer. So that is one reason why we chose that versus targeting a Prism element cluster here in this case. So in this scenario, right, you just simply, I'll just use an IP address. Let's see, I think 251 in here. And then yeah. So in that case, we connect. Now, one thing I will mention, right, because I think it's really important, and this is one of those I think you mentioned earlier. I don't know, Andrew, if you said sort of argument or not, but debate or whatever else, right? But we, engineering wise, we went back and forth quite a bit on this, right? Because I think for other platforms, sort of insecure or non-trusted certificates are allowed in this case. And that team is now taking a very hard line, as you guys probably already know, right, on not doing that any longer. And by default, we ship a self-signed certificate it is part of Prism Central. And so that is sort of a little bit of a hiccup potentially. And we made sure that we well documented that as part of the process. So you do need an actual CA signed certificate to be able to make this connection. And then of course, in this scenario where I'm connecting by IP address, it also needs to have an IP SAN associated, right? So that it can actually validate that as well, right? So I just figured I'd mention.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, that was one of the first things that came up last week. After everything was GA, somebody asked me like, hey, I keep getting this error. And I probably a little too rudely, I took a screenshot of the docs that point out you have to have a signed, an actual signed certificate. So, it is.
Yeah, no, I mean,
the docs explain exactly what you need to do and how to do it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we provide a mechanism to be able to replace a certificate even via the UI within Prism if you want to be able to do that. Of course, the other key thing here, depending on where you're running the installer from, of course, that certificate also needs to be trusted, right, on the actual installer machine as well. So, a couple different things to kind of get through it in that case. But now, of course, in this scenario, once we do that, we then need to select the actual Prism element cluster, right? Like which actual Nutanix cluster from here do I actually want to install on? And in my lab, of course, I just have sort of one cluster in this scenario. Of course, then sort of selecting the networks that you want to mention. Now, of course, in the case of networking, I'll also mention here, right, is that it is very similar to sort of bare metal or vSphere type deployment, right, where you need to provide sort of IP addresses, right? That's, again, sort of prerequisite for API, VIP, and that kind of thing up front. So again,
standard on-prem IPI,
Yep, exactly. And so in that scenario, right, in this case, I'm just going to then query that cluster for the networks that are defined. Now, what's really great about our platform is we do provide what we call IP address management, IPAM, right, which allows customers sort of define a subnet and then assign IPs and that kind of thing. So in this case, that is a requirement for IPI as well, right? So it has to be within sort of that managed network. And so in this case, right, I would just choose sort of the correct one. Here is the VIP IP, right, in that case. I mean, but I'll do it for sake of doing it here, right? But there's nothing unique to our platform here, right?
Yep.
So oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Johnny.
It's a quick question on the networking. So do you have like I'm assuming that you're using all the KVM networking as well. Like you have just like standard network setup in there, and then that's routing out to your actual physical network. So then, is that pretty much how it's going, or is it like you're doing all physical and then overlaying in?
Yeah, no. It's that exact, right? So this is sort of internal to the actual cluster itself and where we control that, right? And it's all sort of standard, kind of networking within AHV and that kind of thing under the hood. Nothing necessarily unique. But we, again, right, like the key here is that from our perspective, Nutanix perspective for customers, it's all managed, right? So, it's not like you would go configure that directly in the host or that kind of thing, right? Like you would actually, in this case, right, just like I'm making an API call to Prism Central to actually have me choose them, same kind of thing, right? Like I'm going to interact at API level with Prism Central to actually build my cluster and do all those things.
Gotcha.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so I'll let you finish typing. But there's a couple of questions that have come up here in chat. So Nepal, how to describe OpenShift in layman language. So Christian and I think Johnny both had pretty good responses there.
Our Hope 9. I got to give credit where credit's due. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at your name, which is saying thanks, Our Hope 9. So yeah, OpenShift is Kubernetes. It's an opinionated Kubernetes that provides everything that you need for a production deployment out of the box. So, if you use quote unquote vanilla or upstream Kubernetes, you have to do things like identify an SDN and, how do you do operating system management, right? You have to deploy it onto some operating system. So how do you manage that? What do you use for, gosh, my mind is going completely blank here, but if you want to use a service mesh, if you want to use a registry, if you want to use all these other things, OpenShift provides all that out of the box. Best path to learn OpenShift, I think that's subjective. So for me, I'm a hands-on person. I love to just get hands-on. There's a bunch of different scenarios and a bunch of different stuff out there that you can learn from. The Red Hat Learning folks do a phenomenal job as well. They're really good at teaching folks OpenShift. So, I'll always check out their stuff. But there's some other links. And Johnny, I see you posted them in here. Learn.openshift.com is a great starting point, and it'll get you, introductory stuff for all of them. Is CKA good? And honestly, I don't know. I haven't taken the CKA. I probably should at some point just to get familiar with it. But
It is good. It is good.
Johnny,
It's very.
I was going to say you did it, didn't you?
Yeah, I did CKA and CKAD. It's just like the Red Hat exams. It's practical. It's 2 hours long. You have a number of tasks and the relevant. And I think that's what makes all of these exams, the CKA, CKAD, the DO280 and the 288 for Red Hat, which is essentially the equivalent, right? 280 and CKA and 288 CCAD. They're hands-on, and the things that you're doing, you'll use them throughout. And I think that if you're studying for the Red Hat stuff, you can use the CKA because you're still going to be using config maps, you're still going to be using secrets, you're going to still be deploying applications, and vice versa, right? Just with OpenShift, you'll use some of the OpenShift goodies. So that it's probably not going to translate as well over to the CKA, but yeah, they're both very good.
Yeah. Let's see, Dwayne, what is the difference between Nutanix and Rook? I can take a stab at that, or if you want to, Andy.
You start, Andrew.
So Nutanix is an entire platform. So it is a hypervisor, it is storage, it is all of those things, right, put together into a single hyperconverged package. So Rook is a Kubernetes abstraction for deploying and managing storage. So if we pick on ODF, right, OpenShift Data Foundation for a moment, ODF is Ceph that is deployed and managed by Rook underneath the covers, right? It's just our downstream productized version. Whereas Nutanix, there's the hypervisor. So you create virtual machines that are OpenShift and you deploy those inside of there. And then you hook the CSI driver for Nutanix into there, and then it can consume storage from that underlying platform. So one is a full platform. The other one is just a storage and Kubernetes native storage deployment. I hope that covered it.
Worked for me.
Yep, Johnny, thank you for filling in all of the links there. Appreciate that. All right, so I think I saw your screen. You had you finished up the so the generating the ignition config there, or excuse me, install config there that has all the fields inside of it. And to kind of exactly what we were saying before. We didn't do anything special, right? It's Nutanix is just another IPI target. So it has the relevant metadata that the installer needs to find out where to create the VMs at, where to get the data from, what networks, what storage to connect it to, all of that other stuff. But it's just it's an install, and it behaves just like all the other installs too. So OpenShift install will connect to Prism, and it will deploy the template virtual machine inside of there for the control bootstrap and control plane nodes. And then once it finishes bootstrapping, Machine API takes over and uses the credentials and everything else to then talk back to Prism to provision the worker nodes. So that way you can go through and it's a self-sustaining cluster and all that other stuff. And I believe, and I probably should already know this, I should have tested this. I think it also configures. Is the CSI driver a part of the OpenShift CSI storage driver operator? So it automatically gets configured?
Yeah, no, great question. Right. So not in 4.11. One prerequisite that we found there for CSO integration is open sourcing. Right. And so again, CSI for us has been around for, at least a number of years and that kind of thing, and has not been open sourced, but it is in target to go that direction. We're hoping to get it into 4.12. In that case, we'll directly integrate with CSO in that case. Now, the really great thing, and you guys may know this, I don't know, but in sort of working with sort of the guys on the CSO side and engineering, is that there's already been sort of precedence for migrating OLM-based CSI to being sort of managed by CSO. And so we've learned from that. And so the OLM-based CSI that we ship today is already pre-set up to make that transition really easy for customers when they want to be able to go over to sort of CSO manage. Yeah, so that should be really, really, really easy.
So to unpack that a little bit, so we're talking about CSO managed CSI drivers and OLM managed CSI drivers. So CSO is the cluster storage operator in OpenShift. So when you deploy to some platforms, basically it will automatically configure a storage class and everything that you need in order to consume storage off of that platform as a part of the installation process. That's managed by CSO, cluster storage operator. So in this case, as Andy mentioned, the Nutanix CSI driver, due to some prerequisites, isn't there yet. So instead, we deploy the Nutanix CSI driver using the Operator Hub catalog, which is just the way that you do with a lot of other storage drivers as well. Hitachi, Nutanix, or Fujitsu was the one I was looking at the other day, Infinidat. So I think the implication here is that instead of when the install finishes, you can immediately go in and there's a storage class that you can start consuming storage off of. Instead, we just go in and we click the button in Operator Hub that says deploy the Nutanix CSI driver, and it does it. I also think, if I remember correctly, that demo video that I linked, the greatest Nutanix install video of all time
ever.
I think we showed configuring the CSI driver inside of there as well. I'm trying to click through and look. Yeah, it does. So there's somebody went and put chapters on the thing. So it's one of the chapters out in the 4-minute plus range shows deploying the CSI driver using Operator Hub. So you can you can go and see exactly what that process looks like. Because I think if I remember what you said at the beginning of the stream or just before we went on air, is your cluster fails. It broke. So we can't actually show a deployed cluster inside of Prism.
Yeah, I blew it away, of course, right? And to do it again for you guys live in Johnny fashion, it failed. Now, had you told me that Johnny or I was a regular watcher, I would know this, that I should have avoided that. And I was doomed. I wouldn't have done that. I would have backed it up. But no, I will take an opportunity to mention to you in terms of that configuration. We do, most of this is all sort of certainly documented, but we also took the opportunity, right, sort of in true Red Hat fashion, everything else, right, really jumping on the open source bandwagon. In this case is that we now are also open sourcing documentation. And so for this, right, our entire kind of post install steps and that kind of thing is now also hosted sort of in an open source fashion on opendocs.nutanix. And of course, there's an entire section here, certainly for kind of post install. To be able to not just install the operator, but also go through and change, like if you want to certainly put registry on sort of volumes, files, in this case, or even, sort of use underlying Nutanix objects is the backend store as well. So it's all sort of fully documented there.
And speaking of Nutanix object, is that able to be provisioned from within the cluster, or is that can I use the CSI driver or a PVC to request object capacity as well?
No, not yet. And in fact, like what we're actually working on is a cozy driver. In that scenario for objects, right? Which we're really close to releasing. I think we haven't yet made it public. I think we're in kind of a preview with a few customers for that. But we are really, beyond this, another even piece, right, is sort of database access, certainly virtual machine sort of operators and that kind of thing, which certainly we could go down that direction if we want to talk about it all, but which I think is really cool. But those are all set to land within the next few months.
Okay. So I know we've only got just a couple of minutes left, so I want to take the opportunity to put out to our audience. If you have any last minute questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions, etc., please go ahead and get those into chat, and we'll address those here in the last couple of minutes. So our Hope 9 ahead of NetApp, yes-ish. So NetApp chose to do their CSI certification a little differently. So it's a part of Astra. So to use NetApp's certified CSI driver, you have to use Astra. It's not a standalone thing. You still have to use the standalone outside of OLM deployment method for NetApp. But yeah, so Andy, if there's anything else that you want to talk about, I don't know if you want to talk about roadmap things or anything like that. I know there's a bunch of stuff that we have going on in the background, and honestly, I don't know what we can and can't talk about, so I don't want to open my mouth about it.
I'm going to claim that I don't either, in case I say something. Oops, that was by accident. No, I think again, sort of the great news here is that everything we're working on again is directly contributed and that kind of thing. So certainly enhancement requests, that kind of thing is all pretty public. We're 4.12, I would say from a feature perspective, we want to kind of take a step back, put it in hands of customers, see where we should really go. So I'd say it's a number of sort of cleanup items. Again, hopefully moving to CSO for CSI is one of the big things, right? Certainly supporting egress IP, a lot of other validation things like air gap support, that kind of thing. We're kind of going through as part of that. Oh, I know one thing actually I will mention is that today, sort of MAPI integration, we kind of overloaded a couple of other things since we didn't have a publicly available CCM available. That is close to GA now. So 4.12 will properly integrate MAPI into sort of node controller as part of our official sort of CCM that will go public as again, open source here very soon. And then we're also in the back end working on a cluster API, a CapEx provider. So we can't wait to hopefully get all that sort of merged, MAPI and CAPI, and do all that good stuff in the future. So we're certainly lending our voice to that process on the Red Hat side as well.
Yeah, and so for anybody who doesn't know, so machine API or MAPI is what's used by machine API operator, right? Config inside of OpenShift. Cluster API is what's used by Hypershift, among other things, or hosted control planes. So having that type of setup available in the future, I think will be really cool. So if anybody's interested in that, let us know, let your account team know, so that way we can make sure to get the appropriate prioritization done within product management for all those providers. Everybody wants Hypershift, as a provider. So they're having to figure out or prioritize which platforms to do first. Yeah. So I don't want to put you on the spot here, Johnny, but I know you got to go in just a minute. So thank you for everybody. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. We appreciate all the chat, all the questions that you've had. Again, if you have any questions that come up, if you're not watching us live, anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me on social media at Practical Andrew, all one word. or via email at andrew.sullivan or andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. Man, want to put an at in front of everything. It's Twitter's taken over my life here. Let's see, questions here. Let's see, can I start OpenShift after RHCE? Yes, of course. There's no prerequisite for RHCE for an OpenShift, though. And Johnny, I see you pointed that out as well. What is the role of OpenShift in DevOps? So OpenShift is a Kubernetes platform. So if you're using Kubernetes, containers, pods, etc., for your applications, then it would be just a part of that whole process. DevOps is kind of a fuzzy thing. So, Johnny, thank you. Appreciate your help today. Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking time out of your day. We'll definitely have to have you back on as more things evolve. Love having the conversation with you and learning more about the technology. So I will, Andy, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, and Johnny, I'll leave you with last words.
Right on.
No, thank you guys. I certainly appreciate it. Certainly looking forward to come back for sure. And next time, maybe could we try to schedule when maybe Johnny's not around and maybe my demo would work?
He's a curse, right?
Blessing and a curse.
I'm happy to substitute host whenever he may be out.
and we appreciate that.
That's good. You did good. That's awesome. Oh man. Yeah, Andy, thank you, man. And congratulations to you and the team. I know it's a lot of hard work, and to see it kind of come to fruition, and we're excited. Andrew and I are still waiting on our Nutanix server to show up. So like as soon as we get here, or as soon as we see it, we'll gladly do a demo for you. Most likely Andrew, so that way I don't mess it up in front of everybody. But no, seriously, thank you, and congratulations to you and the team. And for all the viewers, keep the questions coming, and make sure you like and subscribe. So that way we can keep these things going. And if you have any questions, hit us up on the socials or send us an email. Thank you. And Stephanie, you're awesome. Thanks for doing all this work behind the scenes and making it legit.